Hello, I'm Mark Ells, Town Manager of Barnstable, and I'm here to provide you with my community update. Well, it's been a very busy summer. Weather hasn't always cooperated, but I can tell you that all of our summertime activities have been full and exceeded past years. So we're very excited that people are active out there in the community and for the most part staying safe. And we look forward certainly to the month of August as we close out the summer season. We've been very busy as well with our town council and staff. Last two meetings with council, they've approved two significant ordinances, one related to a sewer assessment, the other related to accessory dwelling units, which was a zoning ordinance. And I would encourage you all to go to our website and take a look at both of those because they may impact you. And there's a lot of detail, so I think it would be worth, if you have time to watch the council meeting, to look in both cases at the discussion of the items, and then to read through both of those ordinances. They're both modified ordinances, and to become familiar with them and ask questions, and we're certainly here to answer any questions that you might have. Coming up at our next town council meeting, we're going to have a workshop discussing the Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan and moving forward with funding it. And the discussion will be specifically, how will we pay for the remaining costs, the costs that exceed the identified revenue sources that we already have in place. And Mark Milne and I will be doing that presentation and workshop with our town council. And again, we're really looking to work with our council to have them establish fiscal policy so that moving forward over the life of this plan, we can have a long-term consistent fiscal policy relevant to the implementation of this Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan. We've also got a commitment with our community and our council that we'll be looking at this in 5-year increments, and even though it's a 30-year plan, and we'll be updating. And I had the opportunity to testify recently at the PFAS task force. I was one of 10 communities that was able to share testimony. And this is a working group, a task force that has been created here in Massachusetts to take a look at these emerging contaminants. And I've been actively involved in these issues my entire time with the town, certainly, but this specific one, probably for about the last 15 years. And in the last 5, this has really risen to an issue that we need to keep a close eye on. And I expect as we do 5-year increments with our CWMP at some point, when the regulators are actually contemplating more specific regulations relevant to this, this will become another layer of our water resource management plan. It is now in the preliminary stages, but certainly when regulations are either contemplated to be created or created, that very much changes the way we need to manage issues. So what are these contaminants? You hear about them relevant to fire foams, for example, at the Fire Training Academy here, airports, treatment plants, landfills, etc. We don't really have industry down here that produces these sorts of chemicals. So the testimony was actually we were the only community on Cape Cod, even though you've seen articles about Mashpee and Chatham and other communities that are having the same challenges we've seen here in Barnstable. It's across the entire Commonwealth and the country. So what are these? Well, I've already said that in the case of a point source, it could be a manufacturer somewhere that produces these chemicals. And these chemicals are used with widespread applications. They're everywhere and used in a lot of products. They're also used in fire foams. And for years, since the 50s, have been used in fire foams. They've been banned at this point. They have another chemical now that they use in fire foams that is actually being looked at as to whether that's an emerging contaminant as well, but we'll save that discussion for another day. But the discussion this time, and again, I've been involved in these for pretty actively for about 15 years, most aggressively the last 5. This was the first time communities from across the Commonwealth came forward and weren't talking about point sources. They weren't talking about it being only things like, where fire foam has been applied at an airport. The discussion that we had, or the testimony that was given, spoke to the individual homes across the Commonwealth, whether they go into a septic system on site or whether they go to a wastewater treatment plant, being contributors to these chemicals entering the environment. And if you don't know where they come from Teflon pans, they come from fire-resistant clothing. A lot of our children's clothing, it says right on the label, fire-resistant. We wash those in our washing machine. These chemicals go down the drain and into the environment. They come from upholstery cleaner and carpet cleaners. They come from dental floss. They come from the packaging around, hamburgers, for example. Not the styrofoam, the other, the more paper-like wrapping. And we ingest these things, but it's not regulated there. It's regulated in our drinking water. So the discussion of these communities was, when are we going to start addressing this at its source rather than at the end of the process? And, Barnstable and other communities we're talking about the $20 to $25 million filters they have to put on their water supplies because this stuff is getting into water supplies across the Commonwealth. And, they didn't produce it. We're not producing it, meaning the town of Barnstable's municipal government doesn't produce this. The treatment plant doesn't produce this. This comes from us. In a point source, it can come from a specific source. Like I said, fire foam's a good example. But all of us who have Teflon pans and use fire-resistant clothing or spray some sort of guard on our furniture, and ultimately it can get into a washer machine or down a sink or out into the environment, and it goes down into the ground, and it doesn't stop. They're called forever chemicals. Forever contaminants, meaning not much stops them or breaks them down. The other aspect of this that we spoke about was that the ability to test for these has advanced and can go down to far more minute amounts than we've ever been able to do, over past decades. There's also a tremendous amount of research going on about the impacts on human health by having these sorts of contaminants in our environment long term. What does this all mean? It means the best way to manage this is for us as a community to understand it and to modify our buying behaviors. There's lots of substitutes out there for, you don't have to use Teflon pans. You can use cast iron. You can use stainless steel. There's lots of opportunities for you to educate yourself and then begin to modify your consumer behavior. That will go a long way in reducing these concentrations of these contaminants that then we have to manage right now with filters on our water. And I think probably in the next decade they'll be looking at certainly wastewater treatment plants, but the interesting discussion was, what about on-site wastewater? Because lots of people have Title V systems across the Commonwealth, and the whole focus has been on nutrient loading. And now that focus is equally shifting to these emerging contaminants. And collectively, if we all release this, if the majority of us, which is true in Barnstable, have on-site systems, what we're putting that, it's coming from us. This isn't something that's being, produced by a treatment process. It's coming from us. So I just want you to think about this. I want you to become educated on it, ask questions, certainly participate in anything that we're doing relevant to it. You'll hear a lot about it here forward. Because again, I say this a lot, but we live on top of the water. We drink and swim in and certainly use for many purposes. That is different than up in the Boston area where they get their water from 120 miles to the west in the Quabbin Reservoir or other reservoir. I think there's another one tied in there. So we are different. We have an extremely sensitive environment here, and the more we understand it, the more sensitive we become, knowing that we impact our environment. We become more knowing of that sensitivity. So please join with us in understanding this and help us on the preventative end to manage these emerging contaminants. Thank you, and I'll provide you future updates.